fucking niggas since the fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
There was a screen cap floating around that was fake, and it was made to look like it was an actual article. But it was a fake article. It was about how this new thing that Reddit is doing, instead of banning trolls, is creating what they call like a troll heaven, something to that effect.
Like heaven banning, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, heaven banning, where it's like, instead of banning you and making you all upset and making you maybe even attack the system, they keep you within the system, but kind of segregate you off into this part where it's just you're interacting with bots. So you have upvotes on your posts, and you'll even have maybe a botnet saying great point and engaging in increasingly sophisticated dialogue with you to make you feel like, oh, I'm being heard. My points are being upvoted, and I found a community of people like me, and we are the bulwark against the rest of Reddit. But it's all fake. It's all AI. It's all bots. You're not actually engaging with real people. And this is something that happened recently when Elon Musk was mentioning that he was going to buy Twitter. And a big point of contention was the amount of bots on Twitter, which is real, which is something even marketers like myself have talked about for years. This has been a problem with Twitter for years, which is why no one really advertises on Reddit, because we know it's mostly bot traffic. And we actually know the companies that do this. They have websites. You can find the famous case would have been Share Blue back in the day when Trump was in office. Democrats saying like we're purposefully gassing up the numbers on these tweets as a form of resistance, but they'll be open about how they employ botnets to post links upon links to other people's tweets. And there was a screenshot floating around recently of a woman who realized after Elon Musk mentioned that the bot problem, Twitter started getting rid of a lot of its bots. And this woman, whether or not this is fake or indicative of anything wider, but she lost like most of her followers, and she realized that, oh my god, for the past 5 years I thought these people were my friends. I've actually had some back and forth conversations with them. It turns out they're bots. I actually don't have any friends here or followers.
Yeah.
And we could say, okay, maybe that's an anecdotal piece of evidence, but that is something that happens quite a bit. And people will say, oh, this was a fake post, a fake article. But like, why wouldn't they do this? It seems easy. It seems like an elegant solution to make these people feel like they're moving the needle politically or whatever it might be, culturally, but they're not. They're just in an asylum. We've created an asylum for the people we don't like. And we've created a system where they won't rise up against us. That seems like something they would do, and it seems like something they have done because they have the technology.
Yeah.
We have a chatbot on our chat. We recently added a chatbot, and it's delightful because it's very bad. It's very, it's supposed to be employing this machine learning algorithm where you'll say things and it'll try and mimic what you say, and over time it's supposed to get better. It's hard to tell if it's getting better. There's been it's just gibberish. From the outside, it's just schizophrenic gibberish, and we all laugh. But there are cases where you can create ones that are, if you have more inputs of data, it can learn faster how to sound like a real person. Now, it's not crazy to me to say that in a few years, you'll have more and more sophisticated bots. So why couldn't they do this? Now, this ties into the dead internet theory. And for people who don't know, the dead internet theory is this. It's not even a theory, really. To me, it's just reality, where if you look at, this is kind of what the deep web was about too, where they said, the vast majority of websites on the internet are dead websites. So you're talking like old GeoCities websites. You're talking about just abandoned websites that aren't updated anymore for whatever reason. And they're still out there. And that is true. That is a problem. And how much data is just taken up by stuff that's not even active. The second half of dead internet theory is that most of the interaction happening and the bandwidth exchanges is just bots. And that actually is true as well. It's automatically linking things. It's automatically engaging. It's not even that hard to set up. Hobbyist programmers set up their own chatbots all the fucking time. So it seems to me if you just put a little bit of money behind it, you could create this system. So then guys like us will slowly over time find themselves in these little synthetic islands. This is why I think going forward, and I don't know exactly how to do this perfectly, but I think in real life vetting will be essential. Not even for a political movement, but just to prove that you're talking to real people.
Yeah.
Because one thing our guys are good at is forming these little communities. We like communities. We like communities with, we got a ceiling on how many people we want there, because you get too many members, it gets crazy. We seek out communities and we actually make, these relationships online. But you are at some point, I think in the future, going to need to start meeting people in real life just to prove they're real, because this is going to be a lived reality, in my estimation. I think this is inevitable. And I ask myself, why wouldn't they do this? It seems perfect. It seems like a perfect solution to trick people, to get them to shut up, to not cause any problems, and not have them rise up against you and call attention to it. So yeah, why wouldn't they do that? Reddit, you can probably do very easily because people on there are pretty fucking stupid. But here, yeah, like there's a lot of people on Telegram who might be bots right now, considering the cold ass takes I'm seeing, just repeated again and again. Like,
I think goofball drunk voice chat is a great way to also prove that they're not bots.
Yeah, you're gonna have to maybe, and that'll be the next thing probably, where they start mimicking voice chats, and then just pretend they're from a different country. So it sounds somewhat disjointed, but
well, look, even our hazing process, when somebody joins the Telegram chat, we tell them to immediately come back with an original racial slur. But it could be anything, make a haiku, or no, that'd be too easy. Actually, a racial slur is actually probably the better one.
Haikus were made for machine learning. It can't be that.
Literally they were. Yeah.
Yeah. Machines cannot, or they struggle with creating, accurate, back and forth conversations. Of any fucking dumbass robot can make a poem, because most poems fucking suck. You could get, let's take it a bit further. You could get a fucking Atari to write most of the shit that's on Netflix. By the way.
You feed the complete works of Keats into an AI, and it just starts typing shit, your shit, gay, fucking horrible garbage shit, your wave, nigger wave.
No matter what you feed into it, just a bunch of slurs come out.
I love robots.
Hey, I fucking love science. This is what science tells us. I'm listening, I'm learning, I'm believing science. It turns out the hyper-intelligent robots just want to say slurs. I didn't make them. That's pretty much what the dissident right is about. You take a bunch of kind of shitty algorithms, you feed in a bunch of old books, and racism comes out.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, this scene rocks. I wouldn't want to be in any other one. I like it. But to me, what it's trying to solve, and they won't attach this sort of language to it, but what they're actually trying to solve is people's desire to feel like they're being seen and they feel like they're being heard. And this is the great democratic illusion that we find ourselves in, because everyone says, voting doesn't matter. And like we discussed earlier in the episode about our time working in the government, they have all of these systems in place to make the average person feel like they're participating, whether or not it actually matters. And most of the time it doesn't. It's just a pressure release for people. And, we're not the first people to say this, obviously, but it's true. And I'm wondering what other pressure releases can you introduce in a more positivistic way, which is what they're trying to do. They're trying to create these substrata where all the problem makers, all the troublemakers they believe they're doing, it's pornography. It's political pornography. They're getting us to just jerk off in a corner. And our whole thing is, let's find new corners to go into. We're actually making it easy for them by trying to check out of the mainstream and build our own little, what are functionally asylums, except filled with real people. But what happens if they're not real people? And that's going to be us. And I think I'm trying to find ways to test for that. And I think we have a few ways, but vetting is going to have to evolve just to prove that you're not talking to robots, because that'll break your soul the day you figure out that all these guys I thought were part of my group turn out to be some kind of an algorithm designed by Coca-Cola, because at that point corporations are going to get involved.
I wonder if you could use blockchain for that. Like, you have a certain number of people that you trust, and you get them to sign off on another person because you haven't met them, but these three people that you trust have met them, like a cell structure. You can wrap, because it's difficult for every single person to meet every other single person, but you could create a semi-trustworthy chain or cell structure.
I'm going to tell you that is something I had in mind. I was playing around with this idea, and I don't have the schematic of this drawn up yet. But I was thinking, okay, what's the blockchain solution to this? And I had an idea, and I don't know if this is even possible, but I was like, it would be great if we could find a way to do exactly what you just said, but also not have it tied to their personal identity. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a way to.
Oh, yeah, like using Telegram as an example, it's tied to your Telegram handle. It's not saying that you're a specific person. It's just saying you are a person. That's all.
Yeah,
it says.
and I think it would be interesting. I don't know how you would do this, but this is kind of what got me excited about it, was saying if there's a way for people to also vet things you have done with politically in terms of whatever movement you're a part of. So if there's a way to build a blockchain portfolio, so if they look up Dimes, they'll say, okay, Dimes, he's a real person, plus he runs this show, plus he volunteered for this protest. He actually attended these protests. So he's not only a guy that exists, but he's put work in. And maybe he's helped set up a website for this person, or he's helped plan this, or he's helped these people out in some way.
And then the interesting thing is, because it's blockchain, because it's public and it's editable through people's consent, like other users, right? Then we could all just say you're a big faggot, and then that would show up on there too.
Yeah, and we joke, but maybe,
Oh,
maybe it's like, oh, this guy has he got arrested for this, or he has a history of doing this, whatever it might. We can negotiate what that is. But I'm thinking you would have sort of a political portfolio, not only of your existence, but the work you put in to also validate you that, oh, this is a serious person. This is a person who maybe attended a conference. Maybe, he went to a fucking American Renaissance conference. Maybe he spoke somewhere. Whatever it might be, we can decide what that is, but then that will validate you as someone who can actually be trusted. You're not some fly-by-night person. So in the future, you'll not only say, oh, this person exists, but, well, who the fuck are you? You're a guy who showed up yesterday. You got a lot of anarchist priors. You're one of these people who kind of came in from the left, maybe because one day you woke up and decided trans stuff just went a bit too far. But it's like, okay, but should I trust that you're a real person, but should I trust you? Should I even waste my time here? Are you a part of like a group of guys, an active group, whatever it might be? There's different groups who have different things. If you're running a peg in one of these, how many bones do you have?
Yeah.
You'll be able to tell on the blockchain, this is a guy with a lot of bones.
He's got a lot of bones. His dreadlocks are very long. He's got very wide hoop earrings. Yeah.
How many churches have you burned? It better not be less than one. Otherwise, you're not coming on fucking Odin Zeitgard's show.
Yeah.
Is whatever they call it, their ritual.
They don't have pool parties. They have jumping in the lake. I don't know what they would do.
Well, pool. Like, how many fucking get-togethers did you do? Are you a juggalo? How long have you been a juggalo? Do you have juggalo priors? How many juggalos do you know? We have a juggalo issue. No one's talking about it, and I'm tired of pretending that we don't. But on that topic of tricking people and hijacking their desire to be seen and to be heard, there's a book that I'd like to talk about. And I think this is going to kick off a little bit of an arc of ours. Because in the past, we discussed a lot of books. And a lot of thinkers and a lot of writers and philosophers, even some people we don't agree with, trying to give every ideology its fair shake, its day in court. We did this with Marxism. We did this with anarchism. We did it with nihilism even. But we hadn't really covered a lot of liberal stuff. We all complain about liberals, and we talk about how we're a liberal people. And some people don't hate liberalism as much as others. I'm kind of known for not being as negative towards foundational liberalism as others, and we'll get into that later on. But we never really read a lot of the just straight up liberal capitalist thinkers and read their books and really given them a day in court. So I wanted to do that. And one book that comes up a lot is this book called The End of History and the Last Man by Francis Fukuyama. Now, I discussed this quite a bit with a prudentialist, which you'll see after the episode. But Francis Fukuyama, he's still around. He's still kicking. He's still teaching. He's somewhere in Macedonia. He's not really taking that seriously, but this was a very famous book. And I think it influenced a lot of world leaders. And I think it still influences them to this day. And what I liked about this book was it gives the liberal, capitalist, democratic worldview not only what they truly believe, but what they want, the world they want to create, and their arguments against the sort of things that we're in favor of. And so I'm like, okay, I read this. It's a pretty big book. I would recommend people read it. There's a couple others that we'll talk about in the next couple episodes, but I think you should read this because it validates a lot of our concerns about, the World Economic Forum, the globalist elites, whatever you want to call them. This is what they want to do, and this is I would argue, the philosophical backbone of a lot of them. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And once you read it, you'll kind of see the world from their point of view. So, this book, written by Francis Fukuyama, a full-throated defense of liberal capitalist democracy. Also, liberal capitalist democracy in a global sense. So he's not nationalist at all. He's also the guy who's saying, yes, we should project this across the world. Yes, we should topple regimes. Yes, we should kill the people we describe as dictators. So this is the guy who does all the stuff you don't like. So let's hear from him. So he raises a few points early on to kind of set the scaffolding for this. Now, he like a lot of liberals, he believes that the only reason we are the way we are now is because this is how things naturally ought to be. So for your average liberal Democrat, they think that, the example we give, that the sharp uptick in gay children or children identifying as trans that we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years is all natural. The only reason that's happened is because we've broken down the barriers of fascism and conservatism and traditionalism that, since we broke down these oppressive barriers, everything that we have right now is just human nature. So what I find about these people is they've staked their entire ideology in this is just natural. We're nature. Everything you guys want to do, the people on the right, the nationalists, you're just these environmental and social constructs. And if we break you down, this is actually what human beings are about. They're all bisexual, and half of them are trans, and they believe that. and he says early on, he says, like, the pessimism of the 20th century, and this was published in around like the late 80s, early 90s. So a lot of this stuff's out of date. But we've had opportunities to check in with Mr. Fukuyama and check in with a lot of these people. All of this is relatively unchanged. They think just the revolution's coming. He says the pessimism of the 20th century was caused by all the world wars, but things are getting better and authoritarianism is falling everywhere naturally and giving way organically to liberal democracy. So again, he's saying that, not just feudalism, but dictatorship, but also nationalism, that's falling away naturally. And this whole thing, this liberal democratic thing, is what everyone just wants organically on their own. And he says the reason he says this is all regimes must be built on legitimacy, which is true. And he says a lot of things in this book that are true. And that's what we're kind of going to get to. I just don't agree with his conclusions. So he says, all regimes must be built on legitimacy. But he claims that all dictatorships were seen as illegitimate. That's the only reason they fell. It wasn't because of any other outside forces. It wasn't because of any sort of coups. If a dictatorship falls, it's just because it was seen as inconsistent.
Sure.
And it only there's some, and that's the thing. You'll see that it just broke. It just broke one day because it wasn't built right. And what he says is behind that, what's behind that is consumerism, and that people just desire a Western lifestyle. And he'll apply this to Muslims, he'll apply it to Eastern Europeans, he'll apply it to South Americans. That the reason these dictatorships fall is because people see America and say, I want to be that. And I actually want consumerism. I want Amazon. I want all the knickknacks and toys. And that's why they topple these regimes. And there is, from his perspective, you can see, okay, I see where you're getting confused, because he sees westernizing countries. He doesn't see that as an outside force, westernizing it maybe against their will, or maybe inspiring these revolutions or these color revolutions or these coups financially. Sometimes they just see this, oh, it just changed one day. They want to be us. That's the only reason. So a lot of what he believes is grounded in that. So if you don't believe that, none of this is going to make sense. But to him, the idea is like, oh, we figured it out. We actually made the perfect society in America. In the West, Britain would be another perfect example. He says, no, this is just the best society. And they saw the best society. So why wouldn't they want to be us? And we need to help them. And that's how he justifies it in his mind, where he's like, even if they actually don't say they want this, why wouldn't they want this? They're probably just too stupid to know. So we got to like knock down their leaders and rip out their government and rip the fucking pipes out of the walls. And then they'll get it later. Because remember, this entire thing is globalizing in its foundations. Like, he truly believes that this is something that needs to project across the rest of the world, which is interesting because a lot of these guys, even Marx, even the fascist writers, the Marxist writers, the anarchist writers, they build these political ideologies out of philosophy. So a lot of this stuff might sound crazy because we disagree with it, but every single political ideology that we've researched, they come at it from a philosophical point of view, and they're always speaking to the true nature of man. And they just have different opinions on what the true nature of man is. So his definition of man comes out of liberalism, which is the self-interested individual, and other people have different ideas. Marxists have different ideas. But when you read this book, realize this isn't that far and away from even fascist literature. They're trying to figure out like what the perfect society is and what the true story of humanity is and what is the perfect man. And that's why he says that he calls it the worldwide liberal revolution. So the worldwide liberal revolution is spontaneous and grassroots driven. Those are his words. And as we reach a cosmopolitan utopia, we discover that we are all the same and we can write a universal history. So that is what he means by the end of history. The end of history is this belief that the history of humanity is all conflict. It's conflict between ideologies. It's us not figuring things out. It's merely a record of our inability to come to terms with anything. But there will come a day, once we've created the perfect society, that, in his words and many others, history will be over. There'll be no more history because we'll have found the perfect system and we can just live on indefinitely. And that's why there will also be the last man. The last man will be the perfectly actualized citizen of this system, that you actually won't need to work. We won't need to fight. We will live in the Star Trek world where we are post-scarcity, where we are post-conflict. There's no racism. There's no anything. And that's why in his utopia is like, oh, we don't need to do anything anymore. Now, when you say that to people like us, that sounds like a prison. That sounds like a nightmare. But to him, he's like, that's what we're working towards. So that's why I think this book is relevant, because within a lot of the globalist elites, whatever you want to call them, the people who are, the Bill Gateses of the world even, this is what they're working towards. Their utopias might be diametrically opposed to our utopias. Because if you ask someone in our circles what our utopia is, we actually don't want to craft a world of permanent retirement, which is what they want. They want a world where no one works, no one does anything. There's no nations. There's no identities. There's no nothing. Everyone just puts their feet up and lives in garden parties. That's what they want. So the reason we are concerned with these people is because we look at their utopia, we hear them describe it, and we say, that whether or not it's practical or realizable doesn't matter, because they can force you to realize it, which is what we see. That's why I want to get into this book. Like, let's really understand what their foundational beliefs are and their utopia, and realize how much we don't like that. But that's why when they do these things, when they make these moves on the global stage, they think it's for their perfect world, which is why they can do these what we might see as evil. They're like, no, you'll thank us later, is what they're saying. And that's why he believes, and this is from the book, he claims that democracy is the only system that can survive in a complicated world and in an industrialized nation. He says only education follows democracy. Education can't exist really in any other nation, because the more you educate people, they just choose democracy. That's what he claims. Because he says advanced societies require more advanced people, and that actually is true.
That's
So
a
there is
pretty
a lot
that's
of
a,
truth.
I'm sorry, I just want to say that's a funny statement on its own, because you're saying the more you educate people, the more they choose democracy. Like, what if you're educating them that like all of the faults of democracy and all of the benefits of monarchy? Like, you're talking about Western educations, they've been like hugely pro-democratically biased for a century. So how can you say, like, that's not a serious comment? Like,
Yeah, well, it's not serious. And also in the book, what I found about this book, especially later on, when he's discussing, the blind spots or the errors in this worldview, he doesn't offer any solutions. So he later in the book he will say China presents the biggest threat to this worldview because they are industrializing and the education is raising, and they're not. We're not trying to be super pro China here, but it presents a rival to the West, and it is not pro democracy, and it is not pro all the things we are. So, well, this breaks his system, and he actually doesn't provide any philosophical or practical reasons what to do. All he says is we got to keep an eye on it. That's it. He's like, and then if we got to take out their leaders, we will. He'll say stuff like that, but he'll look. There's all kinds of examples where this doesn't work, and in the book he'll cite them, but then just move on past them. Another thing he does in the book, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but he takes a very firm stand against offensive realism or neorealism, as we described it earlier on. We were talking about John Mearsheimer and some of these other books, and even Edward Lutwak. The neorealist argument, he has a whole couple chapters about how that's wrong, but he doesn't actually posit a good argument. So he will say that offensive realism about great power politics, about how nations engage with each other on the world stage, he's like, yeah, those rules were good in the 20th century, but we're leaving the 20th century and we don't need them anymore. That's all he says. He doesn't actually say why these guys are wrong or why the theory is wrong or why it doesn't work. He's just like, they're not giving humans enough credit. And I think that all of the old rules don't apply anymore. That's what this is built on. All the rules of humanity, we're reinventing humanity, and all these concerns about sovereignty, about how power exchanges work. He's like, that's old hat. We don't got to worry about that. And that's all he fucking says.
Yeah.
There's nothing else he says. And I was reading about that, and he never says John Mearsheimer by name, which I know he'll refer to him because Mearsheimer's been around forever, but never says his name in the book, which I thought was interesting. Even though it's a direct response to him. Coward!
Humiliation.
And he makes other claims, like there is an undeniable link between liberal democracy and strong economics. He doesn't really go into detail that about much. And he says the universal nexus of modern consumerism has linked the planet into a single entity founded on capitalist relationships. And so he's like, this, what we talked about when we discussed free trade, the issues of free trade. He's like, this is the counter argument that's actually linked everyone in this giant economic machine of dependency, and that's good. But within that same chapter, he also admits that most of the time this was done militarily. Yeah. Because we discussed before about if you talk about the free market, the global free market, only around 30% of nations on Earth participate in the free market. So most of the countries aren't even at the table. So start with that. But second of all, it's that the ones who are seem to have a history of losing to America in a war, right? That's just a weird thing that coincidentally happened, or lost some huge war where they lost their sovereignty and ended up as a vassal state to someone else. That's all. But that's the grassroots movement, I guess, because America just made a better argument with bullets. Whatever. Another thing he does in this book, and this is the meat of what I wanted to talk about, he mentions Hegel a lot because he mentions the roots of liberalism. He goes back in time. He discusses like the philosophical foundations of it with Jean Locke and everyone else. But he talks about Hegel, and then he starts out by saying Hegel was the biggest name to describe how societies fail due to internal contradictions, and this is where we get the Hegelian dialectic. Discovering contradictions, because in his mind, we discussed this in the last episode about how to them, unless an ideology or something is completely consistent internally, it breaks down. So this is how you get Marxism and liberalism. I disagree with that, but that's what they say.
And he had a name for the way in which it moved forward. He called this the dialectical process. Now, can you explain exactly what, in Hegel's mind, the dialectical process was?
Let's go back to the example I mentioned before. Greek society he saw as a harmony, but as a simple harmony. A simple harmony in the sense that people had not developed the alternative notion of individual conscience. There was harmony between the individual and society because individuals hadn't really thought about things themselves. Now, into that simple harmony, there came, in the person, in fact, of Socrates, whom Hegel considers a world historical figure, there came the idea of questioning this harmony. Socrates went around asking people, what is justice? What is virtue? And when they tried to answer, they realized that they'd accepted certain conventions, which Socrates had no trouble in showing could not be sustained. So the simple harmony of Greek society broke down, and because Socrates broke it down, incidentally, Hegel thinks that the Athenians were quite right to condemn Socrates to death. He was genuinely corrupting and subverting Athenian society. But that was an essential part of a historical process, because ultimately, and Hegel fills in the gaps, the steps, but ultimately that led to the rise of individual conscience, and a second necessary element, and the opposite of Greek society. So we've moved from what Hegel calls the thesis to the antithesis. The antithesis of Greek society is individual conscience risen to its height in Protestant Europe.
And that's why he says liberalism is the end of history, because liberal societies, in his word, lack contradictions. And that's a claim he makes repeatedly in the book, that there just is no contradictions in liberalism. Now, from our point of view, we look at that and say, well, that's because you make no claims. Because you have created a veil by saying all the stuff you do is natural. Like, it's full of lies. It's full of lies and half-truths. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But then you just have no opinion on most stuff. So the stuff, a lot of the conflict in society, they would say that's not a result of liberalism. That's just people. But, what are we going to do? Because they have no claims, they have no actual solutions to anything. So one could say this is barely even an ideology, because you just refuse to answer the questions. And a dialectical view of history, like Marx said, means that there's always a momentum towards more progressive order due to contradictions being revealed and then replaced. So what you'll find in this worldview, the liberal worldview, they really believe in the outline of history as just, if it's a line graph going up, that things are bad in the past and everything about the present is better than the past. Why is it better? Because we reveal contradictions. So anything that we might say was better in the past has to be wrong, because it was clearly left behind. If it was left behind and it was only done organically, it wasn't because people made you forget or made something illegal or threatened force on you to not say or do something. So they truly believe that the world as it exists right now is as perfect as it's ever been and is the least contradictory. And they can't answer why the least contradictory society in human history also has some of the highest conflict and the highest suicide rate and the highest rates of opiate addiction. They can't answer that, but they can tell you it's got the least amount of contradictions, and that should be enough. He says that liberalism was essentially invented by Hobbes and Locke, and like communism was invented by Marx and Hegel. So I found it interesting that all these ideologies, even if they're people's ideologies, can be traced back to a couple guys trying to divine the true nature of humanity. And so he references John Locke a lot in this as a reinforcement of what he's saying, which is difficult because John Locke and Hobbes, in a lot of ways, diverge from what he's saying. But he just says, don't worry about that. Because he mentions Nietzsche a lot. And of course, Nietzsche had some opinions about the value of the aristocrat in society and the aristocratic man. And so he likes Nietzsche, but he's like, I think he was wrong about that. So he just like cuts the corners off a lot of these other liberal guys to make his thing fit. Or in true liberal fashion is like, he said this, and that's something we've got to keep an eye on. This, I know what you're thinking. This thing I'm proposing sounds like it has a lot of internal contradictions, and maybe it does, and we should keep an eye on that. Anywho,
Moving on.
Yeah. And also at the heart of it is also natural science. And we're going to get into this in a future episode about the true nature of how science evolves over time through revolutions. But at the core of the liberal ideology is the placement of natural science. You know, the I fucking love science people. And what those people believe is that science is always on the side of the angels, and that every scientist is on the same side. Scientists never disagree, really. Scientists never, fight each other and try and suppress each other. And that everything that science does is in that positive direction. And that once you discover something, it can't be unlearned. So liberalism, and there is something to that. There is something to the fact, in my opinion, that you can't walk back these discoveries. That if we live in a liberal world, a Western man can't unlearn liberalism. He can't collectivize the same way a Chinese person could, or an African person. Even Africa doesn't really collectivize, but like you can't turn the clock back on that and employ time machine nationalism. So there is some truth to that in a lot of ways, but that's why he's like, this is why history never repeats itself. He says this, like, history never repeats itself. We solve the question of slavery. He's like, that's why we don't have slavery anymore in this country. Now, what I might say is that we actually never solved slavery. We never actually solved the master-slave dynamic. And that's at the very core of what he believes as well. He believes that what liberal democracy has done has resolved the traditional master-slave dynamic. Because all throughout history, you had masters and slaves. You had the guys in charge, the aristocracy, and then you had the serfs and the slaves and the peasants. And what liberal democracy did was solve that. I would say that you actually haven't resolved that at all. You still essentially have that same diagram of society. You've just changed the names and tweaked the relationship a bit, but you still have elites. You still have serfs. You still have peasants. We are peasants, and they're trying to make that more explicit in the future of the, you will own nothing, but yeah, all that's eat the bugs, that sort of stuff. Even if it's not that specifically, this is just a criticism, a more direct criticism of what he has to say. I would say we never actually solved the master-slave relationship within liberal democracy. And I think the politics that we are interested in is finding new ways to either refine or change or make explicit that relationship and deal with it in a new way, realizing that, okay, we're always going to have elites in some form. We'll always have this sort of leadership class. What can we do to rein that in? What can we do to make that beneficial for everyone? What can we do? And we need a new idea, because it's not this. Because if you're trying to say there's no aristocracy in a liberal democracy, you're fucking dreaming. If you're saying there's no elites in America, you're fucking dreaming. And find the most liberal part of America. What's the most liberal part of America? California. You're telling me there's no aristocracy in Hollywood?
Yeah.
Fuck you. And he would say, well, we got to keep an eye on that. That's you're right. Well, what we gotta do is we gotta get rid of Trump. That's what he would say. This is why liberals say shit like that, and it doesn't create any dissonance in their minds. And like I was saying before, Hegel and Hobbes, the foundational guys, they differ on the description of the first man. So we talk about the last man, the man who's reached his full social evolution. But then when we go back further to the philosophers, they try to figure out what the first man, what drives man. What this unevolved man, maybe the non-socialized man in his truest form in the wild, what drives him now? And this is what Nietzsche would disagree with. Hobbes and Hegel differ on their description of the first man and what drives him, because they disagree whether self-preservation is the highest drive of man. Hegel saying that the transcendent aristocrat risks his own life to be superior. So they would say, the first man, self-preservation is the number one thing. All he cares is to preserve himself. And that we get this elite, we get this leadership class because there's people who are willing to sacrifice themselves. This is where you get a warrior class. What is a warrior class? They're saying, I'm willing to lay down my life for the rest of this society. It's not even for me, maybe even for my family, but that's still 1 degree removed from what it actually is. So he's like, what do we do about those people? Because if the natural state of man is self-preservation, then the man who sacrifices himself is kind of a heightened man, right? Because if you don't have a warrior, forget elites, forget landlords, forget kings, just the man who's willing to defend his community and not just because it's himself, and the man who doesn't behave like a coward. Right now you have this emergent aristocracy, which is the enemy of liberal democracy. So what do you do about that? Now you see that within the very core of what he's trying to say, there already is a contradiction, but he doesn't do a good job of resolving that. Now, the most important thing, and the thing that I come back to the most, is his discussion of this Socratic term. Socrates talked about this, about Thymos, or Thymos. I've heard it just said a couple of ways. Thymos, Thymos. So the Greeks talked about what I just said, this desire for duty to defend a city or a system outside of just materialist survival. So it's not just, for food and stuff. It's the desire for duty. It's the desire for outside materialism that dictates people's love of justice, and also their desire for recognition. So wrapped up in this term is the belief that the idea of a citizen, that you sacrifice, that you have duty, but also it's that you want to be seen and you want to be heard in the system. I want my voice. I want to matter. And that is, in their minds, a lot of what drives even the first man, the basic man, that no matter where you go, there is something inside every human that wants to be seen and heard. And what he'll claim is that this is what democracy answers for. And you know what? I will agree with him. That is what democracy does. But the failure of democracy tells me that this was just another pressure release valve. That democracy and voting and having your voice heard in municipal meetings is just a way to fulfill that, but not adhere to it in any way, to not fulfill it in the real world. And he's saying, well, that's but on the surface, if I'm reading the description of our society, well, we're doing what people want. What's wrong with that? And that's why when we talk about, to bring it back why we started, sequestering dissident voices off into their own little asylum will be fulfilling the Thymos, will be making us feel like we're moving the needle on society. It'll make us feel like we're doing what we should do, that, hey, we're speaking up and I can tell from these points, these internet points, that what I'm saying is good. And that those points mean change. That means I affected someone. And so they're saying, the technocrats would say, look, we're just giving people what they want. We're fulfilling their most human desire. And you know what? They would be right. But it's broken, of course. And Thymos, what I'm talking about, is what liberals rebel against. In a world of desire and reason, the bourgeois aristocracy is the enemy. And that's the same with Marxists, and that's the same with anarchists too. Modernization is the victory of desire in the free market over aristocracy. So he says this in the book. So Thymos, this desire to be seen. There's Thymos, the desire to be seen. Then there's megalothymos, or megalothymos, which is the extension of that, the graduation of that, which says, not only do I want to be seen, I want to be seen as better than others. I want to be seen as superior. And liberalism is against that. It's actually against both those things. And you say, well, what does liberalism replace it with? It replaces it with, in its own words, rational self-interest. So what is rational self-interest? It's just, I want stuff. That's consumerism. We're trying to surgically remove the desire of people for duty, for honor, for these sort of metaphysical things, and just replace it, graft on this other set of materialist desires. That's what liberal democracy wants to do. That's why consumerism is such a big part of its identity. And they're hoping to replace all this stuff with spirituality. They're trying to replace too. Your love of history, of tradition, replace it with consumerism. And the free market of these desires will remove the aristocracy of the people who are in control. And make a world where not only do people not even really care if they're heard, but they certainly don't care if they're seen as superior to others. So this is where liberalism, this is why, in my opinion, leftism grafts so easily onto liberalism. Because to me, at the heart of liberalism, I see the same battle going on against this. Your enemy is the man who wants to be superior over others. And that'll take the form of like a evil billionaire. But in a lot of the liberals' minds, it also takes the form of the guy who wants to win first place at the race.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
or
this is where you
somebody who
get
just wants to be excellent or something. Somebody who wants to be you think a master of a slave, but also a master in the fields of engineering or science, right?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this is where you get that story. It was a Harrison Bergeron, I believe. It was that story of the future where anyone who is genetically or physically superior is forcefully handicapped. So if you're short, you're made taller, but if you're tall, you're just made short. If you're too smart, you're kind of made dumb. It's got this equalizing effect through technology. It's a short story. I'll try and find out. I think it's called Harrison Bergeron. And here, just to give a couple readings to back it up, here is what he says about nationalism, because he says nationalism is irrational. The desire for recognition based on nationality or race, however, is not a rational one. The distinction between human and non-human is fully rational. Only human beings are free, that is, able to struggle for recognition in a battle for pure prestige. Side note, by the end of the book, he also admits that in the future, man will be no different than animal. Man, that because they'll say like, oh, you're making all these claims about humans. Why not animals? And he actually says, good point. Maybe in the future, we will extend human rights to animals. So if you're wondering where that goes, this distinction is based on nature, or rather on the radical disjunction between the realm of nature and the realm of freedom. The distinction between one human group and another, on the other hand, is an accidental and arbitrary byproduct of human history. And the struggle between national groups for recognition of their national dignity leads, on an international scale, to the same impasse as the prestige battle between aristocratic masters. One or another nation becomes a master, so to speak, and the other becomes a slave. The recognition available to either is defective for the same reason that the original individual relationship of lordship and bondage was unsatisfactory. So in this book, he says repeatedly that not only is racism irrational, a lot of people say that, but so is ethnocentrism. That's irrational. Thinking you should prioritize or center your group identity over others, but then also the entire concept of a nation, that this must be equalized. It's irrational. It's arbitrary. Now, arbitrariness, is that a word? Let's say it is. Arbitrariness is actually central to this. And this is why it's relevant to the modern discourse. So when they say, later in the book, you'll say, so what sorts of, we need Thymos. We need people to busy themselves. So how do they busy themselves? And his solution, I'm paraphrasing here, but his solution is basically a cosmopolitan garden party society. And he says in there, in this future, the Germans can like their sausage and the British can like their tea, but that is going to be the limit of the identity politics that they will be permitted to do. Basically, he says, in the future, there'll be no nations, there'll be none of this stuff, but we will still allow people to play sports. They can have their arbitrary eccentricities. Those will be permitted. And only those will be permitted. Nothing that causes anyone to feel truly different than other people. That's what's going to be permitted. And here's one for you. I'll give you one for free. This is why sexuality is so important to them. So in this future, remove race. Remove ethnicity, remove everything, remove age, remove gender. Gender's off the table. However, you'll notice that they're putting a lot of social capital in self-defined sexual identity as if it were a consumer product. So they have no problem with regular people like us saying, I'm bisexual, I'm genderqueer, and putting a lot of the focus of your life into that, because that doesn't actually matter politically. That's not economic. That doesn't mess with the gears of society. But what they want is people to manifest their thymos in these completely trivial and arbitrary new creations. Because you'll notice the sexuality discussion is divorced from the gender discussion, because the gender discussion is a bit too genetic and biological too. But they've created a new arena for us, where all we do is debate about made-up sexualities that don't really matter, but they matter a lot to us. So that's the arena they want us to, and they want us debating about food, stuff like that. That's what will be permitted in this society, and that is what this whole LGBT movement, in my opinion, is really pushing. It eventually you will remove the gay. Eventually there will be no gay and lesbian. There will be trans. They'll allow trans because trans is just the jumbling up of gender. making it irrelevant. And so everyone will just be pansexual. That will be the one identity, the one sexual identity. And within pansexuality, you can have as many color swatches as you want. That is the world they are creating. If you're wondering, that is what it is. And those conflicts will be just silly. They'll be nonsense. And then you'll have parades, and the biggest conflict you'll have will be dueling parades. That is what it's going to be. But he also describes the problems liberalism has. He says, for a liberal democracy to work, the stage must already be set with movements of secularization, rational capitalism, and Western conceptualizations of freedom. This is what he says. All cultures and traditions are irrational. That's what he says. Anything, Muslim culture, irrational. Christianity, irrational. He takes a strong stand against religion, by the way. In fact, in the book, he claims we defanged spirituality, we defanged Christianity, and what we need to do now is defang nationalism. So if you're wondering what these people are saying to each other in the World Economic Forum, it's like, we're going to do to nationalists what we did to the Christians. So there's their plan, and figure out what little skirmishes they will inspire based on that. But like I said, he also says Asia presents a very strong problem that they don't know how to solve. In fact, I'll read you a part here. But the long predicted breakdown of traditional Asian values in the face of modern consumerism has been very slow in materializing. This is perhaps because Asian countries have certain strengths which their members will not easily dismiss, especially when they observe the non-Asian alternatives. While American workers do not have to sing their company song while doing group exercises, one of the most common complaints about the character of contemporary American life is precisely its lack of community. The breakdown of community life in the United States begins with the family, which has been steadily fractured and atomized over the past couple of generations in ways that are thoroughly familiar to all Americans. But it is evident as well in the absence of any meaningful sense of local attachment for many Americans and the disappearance of outlets for sociability beyond the immediate family. Yet it is precisely a sense of community that is offered by Asian societies, and for many of those growing up in that culture, social conformity and constraints of individualism seem to be a small price to pay. So that's what he says, and again, he gives no alternative to that, except implying that that is a problem that we need to solve. It would appear that nationalisms have a certain life history. At certain stages of historical development, such as in agrarian societies, they don't exist in people's consciousness at all. They grow more intense just at or past the point of transition to industrial society, and because particularly exacerbated when a people, having gone through the first phase of economic modernization, is denied both national identity and political freedom. And this is actually true. You can actually look at the formation of strong nation states and identity along these lines. Given past precedent, it should also not surprise us that the strongest nationalisms of today are found in the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe, where industrialization is relatively late in coming and where national identities were long suppressed by communism. The United States and other liberal democracies will have to come to grips with the fact that, with the collapse of the communist world, the world in which they live is less and less like the old one of geopolitics, and that the rules and methods of the historical world are not appropriate to life in the post-historical one. Post-historical meaning the one that he wants, which is liberal democracy. They must, in other words, come to terms with the fact that they're the heirs of the bourgeois revolution started over 400 years ago, the French Revolution. The post-historical world is one in which the desire for comfortable self-preservation has been elevated over the desire to risk one's life in a battle for pure prestige, and in which universal and rational recognition has replaced the struggle for domination. So that's basically what they're trying to replace the world with. It's that we want to destroy self-determination, period, and replace it for desire. And we'll talk about this in the next episode. We talk about the Klaus Schwab Fourth Industrial Revolution, but when they talk about consumerism, and we would say, like, what do you mean, just consumerism forever? Just always going to be consumerism? That is actually what the World Economic Forum says, because a quote from Klaus Schwab, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he says, because human desire is limitless, so are the services that can be created to provide for that desire. So you're asking yourself, okay, I'm hearing what this guy's saying. Now, what does that society actually look like? It is the revealing of new desires or the creation of new desires, new hedonisms, new addictions, new, paranoias, new obsessions, and creating new you say, well, what are people going to do in this new society? It's going to be run a rocket of hedonism into unexplored territory. That's what it is. And just the faith that we'll come up with enough new service industry jobs to service the new hedonisms that we concoct in our minds. And like he says, and the megalothymos, the desire to be above people, will be restricted to sports. Will be restricted to, if you watch the show Downton Abbey, like that, garden parties, interpersonal drama. If you think there's too much drama now, wait till you live in a liberal democracy where drama is the only self-actualizing outlet that you have. And it is a world where the drama creators will be the most powerful. Now consider that. I just wanted to establish that is the world that they're trying to create. And if you pay attention, if you read between the lines of what a lot of these global leaders are talking about, they won't reference this book outright, but I find it a great link between what you might call as the traditional Western liberalism that I think is, whether you like it or not, is essential to Western identity as we know it now, but linking that to the progressivism and linking that to the leftism and linking that to the technocracy and the globalist technocracy that we see now. So then you see that the world we're living now isn't the inevitable conclusion of this book that was written in the late 80s. When was this published? I'm not gonna lie. I have to look this up. 1992. So this is in 1992. So
30 years.
What has changed since then? Quite a bit. But these guys will still maintain that we're on track. And why are we still on track? Because there are forces in the world that are progressing in that direction. And that's really what I wanted to say. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Not only that you should never take your philosophy from a man with a woman's name, or a Japanese person. So yeah, I'm not a big Fukuyama fan after hearing all of this.
I want to. Is Francis a woman's name? Because I know you're thinking Francis McDermott, like I am.
Yeah. Francis with an E. Francis with an E is a woman's name. Francis with an I. I know a Francis who's a guy too. So, but he's also a bit of a fag. So
that's where Frank comes from, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And the woman, she's Frankie.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah. It's these sorts of conversations that other podcasts are not having.
Yeah, they're too afraid.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.